Today we examine an attacking strategy that will make your opponent panic. Imagine a position where all your pieces reach maximum activity. Both bishops exert tremendous pressure on long diagonals, their rooks occupy central open files, and a centralized knight dominates the entire board. These monster pieces attack the entire enemy army, and no wonder your opponent panics, blunders, and his position collapses. But how do you achieve this kind of terrifying position, you might ask? In today's game, former world champion Boris Spassky shows the way, with energetic play in the opening and a fantastic queen sacrifice. Let's dive in and see if you can find Spassky's ideas too. Spassky's opponent, Robert Byrne, starts with e4, Spassky replies with e5, and after knight f3 Nc6, white goes for the Spanish opening, bishop b5, putting pressure on the knight, which is the only defender of the e5 pawn. Spassky replies with a6. Now white has an option, either to capture the knight, after which we get the exchange variation, d takes c. White managed to double the black pawns, but in return black gets the advantage of two bishops, and his pawn is untouchable. After knight takes e5, black plays queen d4 with the double attack, and after the knight retreats, black gets the pawn back with the slightly better position. So instead of bishop takes c6, Spassky makes a more ambitious move, bishop a4, which is the main line. Black develops the knight, attacking the pawn. Of course, white can defend the pawn with either d3 or knight c3, but both these moves would interfere with white's main intention. White is going to put pressure on black's position with c3 and d4. So instead of d3 or knight c3, white castles kingside, which is the main line, letting black capture the pawn. So black can capture, that would lead to the open defense, but black wins the pawn only temporarily, because white would play d4 and get the pawn back. So the e5 pawn will fall, because capturing on d4, the second pawn, is too dangerous, because the black king is still in the center, and after black captures, the e file opens, and after rook e1, the black king gets in trouble. But in our game, instead of the open defense, Spassky goes for the closed defense, bishop e7. So now that the bishop is closing the e file and the black king is ready to castle, black can win a pawn by capturing, first by pushing the bishop away, so that white doesn't capture it, followed by knight takes e5. So after b5 and bishop b3, black is ready to capture on e4, winning a pawn. For this reason, rook e1, defending the pawn. And now that the pawn is defended, white in his turn creates a threat, bishop takes c6, followed by knight takes e5, winning a pawn. That's why Spassky plays b5, this is all theory, well-known theory, and after bishop b3, he plays d6, defending the pawn with the pawn. That means the knight is free, and black is ready to play knight a5 and exchange the knight for white's valuable Spanish bishop. That's why c3 follows, vacating the c2 square for the bishop, so if black plays knight a5, of course the bishop will retreat. Besides that, c3 prepares the d4 advance. Now Spassky castles, and it might seem that it's time to play d4, and d4 is actually possible, but in this case black can play bishop g4, pinning the knight, which is defending the d4 pawn, and black puts pressure, unpleasant pressure on white's position. He threatens to capture the knight, and after that, if white captures with the pawn, of course his pawn structure would be damaged, and if he captures with the queen, black would capture on d4, winning a pawn. For this reason, usually before pushing the pawn to d4, white plays h3. This is a still well-known theory, and white is ready to push the pawn to d4 next move. So now black should choose between multiple possible variations. Spassky plays his favorite Briar variation, invented by the great revolutionist and one of the founders of hypermodernism in chess, Gyula Briar. So he makes a move which at first sight looks doesn't make any sense. He moves the knight to its initial square, back to b8. But this move has a very deep idea. On c6, the knight was closing this diagonal. So black is going to play bishop b7, putting more pressure on the e4 pawn. And besides that, as white is going to play d4, putting more pressure on the black e5 pawn, the knight will move to d7, and from d7 the knight will defend the pawn. But this is only the beginning of the first phase of Breyer's idea. It's not over yet. So white, of course, plays d4, attacking the e5 pawn for the second time. That's why knight d7 follows, defending it. And the standard knight maneuver in the Spanish opening, knight d2. The idea is to move the knight to f1, and from f1 the knight can move either to g3 or to e3 and put pressure on the important squares f5 and d5, and maybe even invade these squares when the right time comes. Bishop b7 follows, attacking the e4 pawn for the second time, and the pawn is also defended 2 times. So white cannot play knight f1 right away, as the pawn would fall. That's why white plays bishop c2, defending the pawn, and now he's ready to play knight f1. So what next? What are the other ideas behind the Breyer variation? So black is going to put more pressure on white's center. One of the main concepts of hypermodernism is to let your opponent build the pawn center and then attack this center with the pieces. So this bishop is already attacking the pawn, the knight is also attacking the pawn. Now it's time to bring the rook into play. So rook e8, indirectly attacking the pawn for the third time and vacating the f8 square for the bishop. Knight f1 follows and bishop f8. The rook's file is open now, and black has created a threat of e takes d, after which the e4 pawn will be attacked for the third time and it will fall. That's why knight g3, defending the pawn. What next? How to increase the pressure on white's center? This bishop isn't doing anything, so g6. And of course bishop g7 is coming, after which both black bishops will put pressure on white's center. Besides that, by playing g6, Spassky takes the f5 square under control, preventing the possible knight f5. Byrne plays b3, taking the important squares under control, and later in the game he might push either the a pawn forward or the c pawn forward. Bishop g7 follows, so now Spassky puts a lot of pressure on white's position, and here Byrne makes a mistake. He plays a4, which is a standard move in the Spanish opening. So by pushing the pawn to b5, black has weakened his queenside, and by playing a4, white attacks black's weakened queenside. However, in this position, a4 is a dubious decision. So you can pause the video and try to find what white should have played instead of a4, and how Spassky punishes his opponent for this premature advance, trying to seize the initiative. So instead of a4, in this position, instead of a4, which white played, it was necessary to restrict the great bishops. So it was necessary to play d5, closing the center and reducing the activity of the black bishops. After which black would love to play c6 in order to capture on d5 and open the center, but right away it doesn't work because white would capture and then the d6 pawn falls. So instead of immediate c6, black, for example, could have played rook c8 and prepare c6 next move, after which white could have played c4 and reinforce his d5 pawn. Black still can play c6, and the engine evaluates this position as slightly better for white on account of his space advantage in the center and on the queen side. But instead of d5, as we know, white played a4, so he hasn't closed the center, and Spassky, using the fact that his pieces, especially his great bishops, are better prepared for the sharp confrontation in the center, he increases the tension to the maximum degree. He pushes the d pawn forward. Now all pawns in the center attack each other, and black threatens to exchange, after which the diagonals of his bishops would be open and they will turn into monsters. So Burn captures on e5, and instead of natural recapture, Spassky makes a stronger move. This pawn is doomed anyways, so it's better to capture on e4, opening the bishop's diagonal. So this pawn is attacked 3 times now, it will fall, and the knight is very strong and it attacks the weak c3 pawn. So both pawns are under attack. That's why the most logical reply for white is to capture this knight, which is attacking the c3 pawn, and white can do it in 2 different ways. It's more natural to capture with the knight, of course, but let's see what happens if white captures with the knight. After this, black captures on e4, and after possible bishop takes e4, bishop takes, rook takes, knight takes e5 follows, and it turns out that the white queen is under attack, and the white knight is under attack. And there is nothing white can do to avoid the damaging of his pawn structure on the king side. For example, if white captures the queen, before recapturing, black will make an in-between move, and white gets doubled and an isolated pawn, and after rook takes d8, black has a slight advantage. His bishop is also more active than his white counterpart. For this reason, after knight takes e4, instead of capturing the knight with the knight, Burn captures with the bishop. Bishop takes e4. D takes e. So what if now white captures with the knight? In this case, Spassky prepared knight takes e5, and again the diagonals of the black bishops are open, and black threatens to capture the queen, and after rook takes d1, not just damage white's pawn structure by the exchange of the knights, but simply winning a piece. Bishop takes e4, because the rook is the only defender of this knight. So the best thing white can do is to exchange the queens, but again black, because if instead of exchanging the queens, white, to avoid to keep his pawn structure intact on the king side, captures on e5, that's even worse. Because in this case black exchanges himself, and after rook takes d1, black captures this knight, and this knight is still under attack, and if it moves away, the c3 pawn would fall. It might seem that white can hold the position with f4, defending the knight, but bishop c2, and the b3 pawn falls, and white's position collapses. For this reason, instead of taking on e5, it's better for white to exchange the queens, but again, black makes an in-between move, destroying white's pawn structure, and after rook d8, black remains with the advantage of 2 bishops, and what bishops? Ideally placed bishops, and better pawn structure. For this reason, knight takes e4 isn't so good, but Burn prepared an in-between move. He plays bishop g5, attacking the black queen. So, what should black do now? His queen is under attack. You can pause the video and try to find Spassky's brilliant idea. Probably Burn expected natural queen c8, and in this case, now that the black queen has moved away from d8 and there is no confrontation between the queens, now white can safely capture on e4. And after black captures on e5, this time, now that there is no confrontation between the queens, this time white can simply capture on e5. And white threatens very unpleasant knight f6 check. For this reason, black would be forced to give up his bishop pair with bishop takes e4, and after rook takes e4 and rook takes e5, so black has no advantage anymore and the position is absolutely equal. So another option besides queen c8, which the engine considers the best, is f6. And in this case, after e takes f, knight takes f6, white has a strong move. Knight d2, attacking the e4 pawn for the third time, threatening bishop takes f6, followed by knight takes e4, winning a pawn. But black in his turn also has a strong move. e3, in order to deflect the white bishop, so white must capture with the bishop, unpinning his knight, and knight d5 is possible, attacking c3 for 2 times and putting pressure on the bishop. The best move is bishop d4 now. Black gets the pawn back, and the position is almost equal, but the engine, it looks equal, but the engine gives a very slight advantage to black. But it seems that Spassky wasn't satisfied with this slight advantage, so instead of natural queen c8 or f6, he found a brilliant queen sacrifice. So he wants to increase the activity of his pieces to the maximum degree. And to do it, he sacrifices the queen just for 2 minor pieces. So first he captures the knight on f3, white captures the queen, and he captures the second piece. But why did he sacrifice the queen? So now let's see why. Both bishops are as active as possible, and both rooks are ideally placed. There is a very unpleasant X-ray. So knight takes e5 is coming with the discovered attack on the white queen. So the white queen is in trouble. Besides that, the white king is also in trouble, because after knight takes e5, which will come with a tempo, black will capture on g2, and the pawn will be supported by the bishop, and from e5 the knight will invade, if black manages to do it. If the knight invades the f3 square with a check, that would be deadly. Let alone the fact that after the e5 pawn disappears, the bishop's diagonal would open, and the e5 pawn will disappear. There is no way white can hold it. The c3 pawn, another weakness, will also fall under attack. So, although the engine evaluates this position as more or less equal to a human, although white has an extra queen, to a human, white's position looks terrible. Black has created so many threats. So how should white defend against all these threats? His queen and his king are under attack. To demonstrate black's attacking possibilities, Max Uwe gives the following variations. So let's see. Black is going to capture on g2, after which his pawn on g2, the black pawn, will be very strong. So then it's natural for white to capture on f3. But let's see what happens in this case. Black captures on e5 with the discovered attack on the queen. White must save his queen, after which the f3 pawn falls. Of course, moving to one of these squares doesn't make any sense, because the king would fall under check. So black would simply capture with the discovered check, followed by knight takes c2. So the only move is king f1. But in this case, knight takes e1, rook takes, king takes. And can you find how black should weave a mating net? Bishop f3, a strong move. So with the idea of rook d1 checkmate. Of course, at the moment the queen defends the d1 square, but black is going to play bishop takes c3 check. The only move would be, so after that, if the queen captures, the rook would invade, of course. So it seems that the only defense is knight e2, defending the c3 square, but in this case, rook e8. The knight is pinned, it will fall. For the queen, black would get the rook and 2 bishops, so black would be up material and his attack would continue. So, capturing the pawn doesn't work. What else? Knight takes e5 is coming with the discovered attack, so another natural idea for white is to move the queen away in advance. Queen c2. Let's see what happens in this case. Knight takes e5 still would follow, and the threat, of course, is f takes g, followed by knight f3 check. So the best thing white can do, of course, white can capture on g3, but then we will have the same variation I have just shown you. So let's see what happens if white captures the knight, eliminating one of the main attacking pieces. In this case, rook takes e5 follows. Black still threatens to capture on g2. That's why white should capture. And bishop takes f3 follows. And let's say after a possible 8xb, 8xb, Uwe writes that while white cannot improve his position, black is going to checkmate his opponent with rook d5, followed by rook d1 check, rook takes d1, then this rook will capture on d1 check, and after king h2, of course black cannot checkmate right away because the knight controls the h1 square, but black would play bishop e5, pinning the knight, followed by rook h1 checkmate. And there isn't much white can do about all these terrible threats. So queen c2 right away also doesn't work. What else can white do? Let's see what Spassky himself suggested after the game. He suggested a move that at first sight doesn't make much sense, but it's a very deep idea. Knight f1. And after knight takes e5 with the discovered attack on the queen and queen c2, f takes g, again black is threatening terrible knight f3 check, but now we can see what was the idea behind knight f1. Knight h2, defending the f3 square. At first sight it might seem that white has successfully defended, but actually now black has 2 bishops and 2 pawns for the queen, which is almost sufficient compensation materially. But positionally, black's position is great, and Spassky himself suggested a checkmating idea in this position. Can you find it? So the white knight defends the f3 square, but what if black reroutes the knight to h3? That would also be checkmate. How to do it? Spassky suggested g5 with the idea knight g6, knight f4 and knight h3 checkmate. Of course, white can try to defend against it, and probably there is defense, but just as an idea it looks very beautiful. But still the engine doesn't like Spassky's suggestion, and the engine gives a big advantage to black. So all the variations we have looked are much better for black. Probably white's best option is e6, suggested by Bondarevsky, Spassky's coach. The idea is, of course, white is threatening to capture the pawn, and the idea is to induce black capture this pawn. But in this case, the rook's file would close, and the activity, the enormous activity of the black pieces would be reduced. But black isn't forced to capture the pawn. Instead, he has a stronger move, knight e5, again attacking the queen, and white can capture on f7, the king captures the pawn. It might look a little bit dangerous, but actually it isn't. So white can play queen c1, saving the queen, and after f takes g, knight f3 check is coming, but white can activate his queen with a tempo, queen f4 check, and after king g8, so knight f3 is still threatened, white can play knight e4, closing the bishop's diagonal, but black has a strong move, rook f8. If the queen retreats, the knight would invade, but white can play knight f6 check, giving back some material, and after bishop takes f6, rook takes e5, bishop takes e5, and queen takes e5, the engine evaluates this position as equal. For the queen, black has a rook, a bishop, and a pawn, and what a pawn, a very strong pawn, but the engine evaluates this position as equal. So, but all this is very difficult, of course, to find in the practical game, and it's understandable that Robert Byrne was under serious pressure. So his queen is under attack, his king is under attack, so many threats. So he decides to, in order to avoid this terrible attack on his king, he decides to give the queen back. And he finds an interesting idea. So first he captures on b5, letting black, of course, make his most natural move, knight takes e5, with the discovered attack on the queen, and now it would be too late for white to save the queen. If he wanted to save the queen, he should have done that a move earlier. So now, for example, if he plays queen c2, black captures on g2, threatening knight f3 again, of course. So the best thing white can do, actually the only thing, is to give up the exchange, but it doesn't help either. After rook takes e5 and possible b takes a, black has a strong move, bishop f3, this time threatening rook e8, followed by rook e1 check, and after the exchange of the rooks and king h2, g1, queen, and checkmate. And there isn't much white can do. For example, if he plays a7 after rook e8, so black threatens to invade. Let's say if white plays queen d2, taking this square under control, it doesn't work. Do you see black's reply in this position? Black can play bishop h6 in order to deflect the white queen. So if she retreats, the rook would invade anyways. If she captures, the same would follow. So the rook invades and the checkmate I was talking about would arise. For this reason, after rook e8, instead of queen d2, white can try to promote, but in this case, rook takes a8, rook takes a8 check, bishop takes a8, black again threatens to invade, and after queen d1, so the queen defends the first rank, and she also threatens to invade d8 and capture the bishop, but black simply defends against this threat, taking this square under control, and it turns out that white is paralyzed. His queen is forced to defend the first rank. The knight doesn't have any squares. All the squares it can move are controlled by black. e2 isn't possible either. If knight e2, bishop f3 would pin the knight, and black is winning. And there is nothing in this position a white can do, because h5, h4 is coming, and black is winning. For this reason, it's too late to save the queen, and Byrne actually wasn't going to save her when he captured on b5. So he captures the second pawn, giving back the queen, but getting a dangerous passed pawn on a6. Spassky gets his queen back. Rook takes d1, rook takes d1. The bishop is under attack, so bishop a8. And black is still threatening to capture on g2, that's why white captures the pawn, knight takes f3, check follows. So it's true, white got a dangerous passed pawn, but for the rook, Spassky gets two minor pieces. So definitely it's clear that black has an advantage. But it isn't easy to convert this advantage. So let's see what happens next. King f1 follows. The c3 pawn also falls, bishop takes c3, attacking the rook, rook c1. So attacking the bishop and also eyeing the c7 pawn. Knight d2 check follows, king g1, bishop a5, defending the c7 pawn, b4, attacking the bishop, knight f3 check, king f1. So now Spassky starts to repeat moves in order to reach the 40th move, after which the game will be adjourned, and he, or probably even his seconds, can find the most precise way to victory. So knight h2 check, king g1, knight f3 check, repeating moves, king f1, and now if the bishop captures on b4, of course the c7 pawn would fall. That's why Spassky makes a stronger move, bishop b6, rook c2, defending the second rank, knight h2 check, again repeating, knight f3, king f1, and king f8. Bringing the king closer to the center is always a good idea in the endgame, and the king also defends the rook. So the knight is very passive. It has no prospects from g3. All the squares are controlled by black, so white tries to activate the knight, knight e2. And the knight is going to jump on f4, and from f4 maybe to d5 or d3. Knight h2 check, again Spassky repeats the position, king g1, knight f3 check, king f1, and bishop e4, attacking the rook. Rook a2, again repeating, knight h2 check, king g1, knight f3 check, king f1, and knight h4, threatening, bishop g2 check, and probably capture on h3. That's why knight f4, taking the g2 square under control and activating the knight. And at this point the game was adjourned, so Spassky isn't going to repeat moves, to make repetitions anymore. Bishop f3 follows, attacking the rook. Rook d3, taking the third rank under control, and Spassky makes a strong move. g5, not just kicking out the knight, but also taking the f4 square under control and ensuring the great e5 square for the knight, so that white cannot play f4 and kick the knight out of this square. Let's see how Spassky is going to reroute his knight from h4 to e5. So the knight is under attack, that's why knight e2 follows, bishop g2 check, vacating the f3 square for the knight. If the king moves to g1, do you see the simple tactics? Then knight f3 check would follow, sacrificing the bishop, but with a fork winning the rook, so black wins the exchange. That's why the king, instead of g1, moves to e1, and now the knight is heading to e5. Knight f3 check, and after king d1, knight e5. Now the knight is greatly placed, the great centralized knight, also with a tempo, attacking the rook. Rook c3, bishop d5, attacking the rook. Rook d2, bishop c4, attacking the pawn. Burn defends the pawn, but rook a8, attacking the pawn one more time, and the pawn is doomed. f4 follows. Burn wants to activate his knight. G takes f, knight takes f4, and the pawn falls. Rook takes a6. Rook takes, bishop takes, knight d5, attacking the bishop, but Spassky is ready to give up the bishop pair. He plays bishop c4. The bishops dominate the whole board, that's why finally Burn eliminates one of them, but after c takes b, the endgame, of course, is winning for black, absolutely winning. He has two minor pieces and a passed pawn for the rook. Rook d6, b5, king d2, knight g6, king e3, h5, and so two pieces for the rook, a passed f-pawn. Spassky is going to play h4, fixing the weakness on h3, after which he can attack this pawn with the bishop. If needed, he can also attack the weak b4 pawn and combine these attacks with the advance of his f-pawn after activating his king. So Burn's position is hopeless, that's why he resigned. And now I recommend watching the game Spassky considered his greatest, or the one where he plays one of the greatest rook sacrifices in chess history, or the game where he makes one of the greatest moves of all time. But first, I'd be grateful if you like this video and subscribe, as it's really helpful for the channel growth.